This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. Well, the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. Our Constitution of the United States is a slice of the laws of nature, our common law, as it's applied to limit government. That's what our Constitution of the United States is. We're focusing on that because we're going through Arthur J. Stansbury's Catechism on the Constitution of the United States. You can find that on the internet. You can go with me if you wanted. It's there, although I didn't find it, and Miss Francine, I don't think, did either. It's there, but the questions aren't numbered for some reason. But you can find it. We're on number 165 out of 333 questions. And we use this as a good way to just delve into our Constitution of the United States. It's not the product of any geniuses called the Founding Fathers. I had a fellow yesterday who disagreed with me a little, and he sent me, well, you should read Federalist number whatever. The Federalist Papers are not law in America. The Federalist Papers are promotional articles written for a New York newspaper by three men that I admire. Well, one of them less than the others, but three men. And they call them the framers of the Constitution: John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. Those are the authors of the Federalist Papers. They were written as a series of newspaper editorials to try to persuade the people in the state called New York to put pressure on their representatives to the Constitutional Convention, the representative to the Constitutional Convention, to ratify the Constitution of the United States. The Federalist Papers are not the law. The Federalist Papers are promotional. Are there things there that are good? Yes. Not against the Federalist Papers. We should read them. But just because John Jay, James Madison, or Alexander Hamilton says something about our Constitution, that doesn't mean that that is the law in America. People I read say things about the Bible. Oh, I listen to them. Maybe they've got a good point. Some of you listen to me. Maybe I got a good point, but I'm not final. No, this is final. This book is final. And our common law tradition is our observations of the way things are and the relationships between things and men and men. That's what it is. And our Constitution of the United States is a thin slice of that. What does it mean? It means what the ratifiers intended it to mean. You say, no, Brent. It means what the drafters intended it to mean. Isn't that popular? Isn't that taught everywhere? Don't people just assume that and say it? Yes. Is that what it means? That's like saying the Bible means what the men that penned it intended to mean. Does it? No, not quite. It means what the Spirit of God intended it to mean. And there are a lot of times that men wrote things, they thought they were meaning one thing, the Spirit of God meant something else. And you can see that in the Bible too. Who ratified? Who's responsible for the Constitution of the United States? Not the founders. It wasn't a bunch of geniuses. They were just putting our common law tradition to paper. What they were used to, the only thing they knew. And they didn't know squat from straight up, sick 'em from come here, about the law of the city, the canon civil laws of Rome, and they didn't care. They didn't care, and none of us ever have in America. In the English-speaking world, none of us ever have, to the point. Listen to this. Here we got a code, the Code of Justinian, that governs every country in the world. Not to mention the powerful Church of Rome and the powerful Eastern Orthodox Church with all of their ill-gained, filthy lucre and wealth. All that. And us folk in the common law countries don't give two hoots and a holler about the Code of Justinian, the canon laws of Rome. So much so, listen to this, that code has never, ever been translated into English. That's how much we care about it. Has it hurt us? Oh, we need to understand other traditions of religion and study, but no. That's like telling somebody from the FBI, you need to understand all the different kinds of counterfeit dollar bills and study them. No. The way to recognize counterfeit bills is to study the real McCoy. And the way to know real law and to recognize error and falsity is to study the real McCoy. And our common law, our laws of nature, and our laws of nature's God are the two volumes of God's expression of who he is and what he wants to mankind. And that's the real McCoy. Real McCoy. You know, the real McCoy is that which delivers, really delivers. The cattlemen in Texas, they discovered there were millions, not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions of Spanish cattle roaming all over Texas, New Mexico, other places they didn't even know about. And when they got there after that horrible war between our states, they said, holy mackerel, this is a gold mine. Look at all these cattle. All we got to do is round them up and sell them. And so they started doing that, rounding them up into herds of thousands, driving, but they didn't have any place to get them to market. Sell them to who? They were in the wilderness called Texas. There wasn't anybody live there. So then the railroads were big east of the Mississippi. We knew how to build railroads, and I had built one clean out to California from back east. So the railroaders said, hey, we got money. Let's build a railroad into Kansas, and they can drive the cattle up from Kansas, load them on, we'll all make fortunes. Well, in days when they didn't have a telephone, internet, radio, what guarantee would a bunch of men have putting out quite an outlay of an investment to try to hire men, outfit men to a long and dangerous journey, outfit them with weapons and ammunition and food, grub, to last months driving these cattle north to Kansas? How would they know that if they got there, there would even be a railroad there? Well, they didn't. Tried it they were told there was a railroad there a few times. They drove them up there and found out they wasted their money and they all went broke. Finally, a fellow named McCoy sent word out to the men that were rounding up those Spanish cattle and said, I'll get the railroad there and I'll have it set up with money and buyers and the whole caboodle. Well, they took a chance on McCoy, some of them. They drove cattle up there, and sure enough, he was there with the buyers, holding pens, a little bit of feed and water until they got them on the railroad cars, the whole caboodle, as he said. And his name was McCoy. And after that, he was called the real McCoy because he was the one that made it real. And ever since then, we've been shipping cattle back to the stockyards in Chicago, and that's where they were going. Well, until very recently. And of course, then they eventually built stockyards in Fort Worth. That made the cattle drive a little shorter. My wife, Mrs. Brent, her grandmother used to tell, that's her father's mother, used to tell when she was a girl, they'd be out working in the garden and they'd see on the horizon a few riders on horses, and then they'd see a few cattle, and then they'd see a few thousand cattle, hundreds and thousands, and then thousands of cattle walking toward where they were settled. And they'd scramble around and try to find some way to keep those cattle from walking over their garden. Well, the cowboys didn't want to hurt the garden, but it was hard to control that many head, and they were a pretty reckless bunch to start with. Yeah, that's how Texas began to have wealth, which a natural resource at that time was just wild cattle. And they're wild, and it took some serious effort from men on horseback to get them driven and corralled and all that kind of stuff. Well, a little bit of the way things were. Let's talk 165. This is a catechism of our Constitution of the United States. Can any families be thus distinguished from the rest of this republic? Can any families be thus distinguished from the rest of this republic? Distinguished? What families? He's talking about families that claim to have titles of nobility. That was the previous question. Titles of nobility. A title of nobility, the word noble means pure. That was a claim by people still in Europe that some people's blood is pure and other people's is contaminated. Like me, I got contaminated blood. America, like Australia, was a bit of a dumping ground for criminals. Australia started out as a penal colony for Britain. Had undesirables they didn't want, that they thought were bad eggs. They got so they weren't hanging them so much. They, well, just ship them down to Australia. That way they won't bother anybody. If they live through it, good for them. Well, America was like that. If somebody was a white person from England, was convicted of a crime, they were sold into slavery into the Americas. That's what the government policy was. England claimed the Americas, so they sold them into slavery in America. They knew they had to have the population in America. The English knew they had to have Australia populated, so they began with rough men who could live in a rough world in the wilderness where other people and the nature itself was trying to kill them. Well, that's the way the Americas were. So they said, well, they may be felons and felonious and dangerous, but they're Englishmen. Let's send them over there and we'll sell them into slavery and we'll build up the population. Did you know when I was in high school, word came out to us in that little town where I went to high school. And I remember the teacher that told us and brought the ad in that if anybody graduating from high school wanted free passage to Australia, the Australian government would pay for it if you'd come there and settle, getting out of high school. They wanted young folk that were ambitious, willing to work. Why did they do that? Because they knew that if they didn't populate, they would die. They already had that experience not a couple of decades before. Well, no, 3 decades before that time, about 3 decades before, where the Japs tried to conquer the island and there were only 3 million people there. That wasn't enough to populate that large island, and the Japs almost got the job done if the Americans hadn't stepped in with the Pacific, or the Asiatic Fleet, as it was once called, and got between the Japs and Australia. They'd be speaking Japanese in Australia, and the Japs would be populating the place. They knew they had to populate. If you don't have population, you won't keep your land. That's part of our common law tradition. That's what the Bible says. The Bible says God gives us a land, and we're to do what? Fundamentally, most fundamentally, multiply, that means have babies, and scatter over the face of the land. That way, we'll keep it. Otherwise, we won't. It's got to be populated. The borders have to be defended. They have to be well-defined. That's the way you maintain a country. And that's what God says he wants. God did not establish tribalism. That won't last anywhere in the world. It's never lasted. No. It's too scattered. God did not establish what we call anarchy. That never lasts either. God did not establish an imperial governments in the world. No, that's not what he wants. What does he want? He told us, I give you a nation, I give you land. Nationhood is what the Bible ordains for mankind. What's the difference between tribalism and nationhood? Well, tribalism is a combination of, it can be anything, anarchy to tyranny, government by a single will. I read a book years ago. Well, I was deep into jurisprudence. I read a book, I think his name was Llewellyn. Llewellyn, back in the late 30s and early 40s, Llewellyn went out among the tribal population of America. We're talking the Indian tribes. And there are a lot of folks still alive that remember the old days. Some of them even remembered they'd never seen a white man. Well, he went and talked to all these old people and interviewed them, wrote a book and put their interview in a book. He wanted to understand what kind of governments they had, especially among the Western tribal groups. Now, watch me close. The Eastern tribal groups in America had sophisticated governments. The tribes in New York, what is now New York, and New England, the upper Midwest along the Great Lakes, those tribal groups up there were highly organized with sophisticated governments, sophisticated ways of living. They were tribal, though. What they never grasped, and this is what God demands, they never grasped because they were demon worshipers. If you're not worshiping Jesus Christ, you're a demon worshiper. You won't be able to avoid it. It's rather fascinating to read. Read history, and you see that over and over again. I was just reading about Abe Lincoln's wife, Mary, from a blue blood Southern family. Well, actually, they weren't anything special. They thought they were. The Todds, T-O-D-D. She was from the Todd family of Lexington, Kentucky. And like the mass migration, even of the Blue Bloods from Kentucky, they moved across the Ohio and the Wabash River into what we call the lower Midwest, the Ohio Valley. And she knew, she thought, when the 5 girls in her family, my husband's going to be the president of the United States. That's what she told her sisters. They all married well, uppity, but none of them married politicians. She said, I'm going to marry the president. My husband's going to be the president of the United States. Mary got off. By the time she got to the White House, it was fashionable. During that horrible war, it was fashionable to have seances. People were having them. Sad, but true. That's what happened. Well, she had some, and a record of it, she had at least 8 that we know about in the White House. That didn't help us. Some people say Abraham Lincoln participated, but the greatest tragedy of Lincoln's life, the greatest tragedy of his life, was his wife, Mary. And if it wasn't been for Mary, he'd never been in politics at all because he just wouldn't come home. He didn't want to come home. It was too miserable to come home. So he spent all his time out on the circuit, going from county to county on his old gray mare with his saddlebags full of books. Sometimes he'd ride a buggy, but he rode that old horse from county to county in either the 7th or 8th Circuit of Illinois, and pick up legal business in the Catechism County courthouses. There weren't that many lawyers, and we made good money. He'd come home every a few months, but he didn't stay there. And because of Mary, you see, Mary, he couldn't stand to be around her. He stayed gone. She was a hellion. It wasn't just PMS, it was bigger than that. One time, when they first got married, they didn't have a place to live. They moved into a boarding house. Her sisters and her father did not approve of the marriage because Abe Lincoln was a galoot. He didn't have any pedigree, as you know. He was no blue blood, as he said one time. Talking about the people that lived in Tennessee and Kentucky. Well, he's born in Kentucky. Said he had more Blue Ridge relative than a Blue Ridge rabbit. That's probably true. Well, no doubt it was. That's where he was from. No, he was a Southerner. He was born the same year, the same state as the President of the Confederacy, Jeff Davis. He was born in Kentucky too. Both of them born in small log cabins in the wilderness, both of them, in the year 1809. But Mary was bad news. And because he didn't want to go home, that's how he became well known. That's how he met so many people. That's what gave him his base to run for Congress, for example, and then later the U.S. Senate. That's because of Mary. God, the Lord do work in strange ways. Now, you say, well, the Lord wasn't doing that. Well, hey, listen, anything that happens is the Lord's doing in hindsight. Don't ever forget that. Because if he didn't want it to happen, he would have stopped it, and he can if he wants. He takes evil things like that and works them to the good of his people, not everybody else, to his people. The most dastardly deed that was ever done was the murder of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The murder. That was the thing that became the greatest blessing to God's people that they could ever have. That's the way God works. Don't forget it. You think you're having hard times right now? Maybe, probably are. Most of us do, more often than we want. Just remember that God will work that for our good. Romans 8:28. Read it. I won't say it here. You go read it. Look up Romans 8:28. It begins all things with the words all things. Well, can families be thus distinguished from the rest of the republic? Nobility from the republic? I said, no, this is not a republic. People argued with me about that. They said, oh, go read the Federalist Papers. I don't need to look in the Federalist Papers. I've read the Federalist Papers. Still look at them. Not bad. It's just that that's not final. Now, what's final? The Constitution of the United States is final, period, when it comes to our common law tradition of government applied to the general government in Washington, D.C. It's like this book is final. Well, somebody say teaching the Bible, he explained all this stuff in the Bible. No, the book is final, not somebody's explanation, not my explanation, as good as I may think it is. And when I tell you things, I'm fully convinced it's true, and I'm not speculating. And if I am speculating or giving my opinion, I want to try to say so. If I know something is a lead pipe cinch in this book, I'm going to try to tell you. I'll give you that much. You still have to decide, but just remember, I'm not the Bible. No. The Federalist Papers are not final. As a matter of what is written, what is final, the Constitution of the United States. Do we need to understand the definitions of the words there? Yes. The phrases, yes. It's couched in the language of our common law. And when he says the word republic, republic is not a common law word. The word republic is not in our Constitution. It's not part of our Constitution. The word Republican is in there, and our Supreme Court has made this observation correctly. That refers only to the legislative branch of our general government in Washington, D.C., the legislative branch. That's the Congress. And our common law government has a legislative branch. Why do we have this confusion? Why is the word Republican in our Constitution? I'll tell you why. And this is a matter of just reading history. The history of our common law is long. It's so long we can't find the end of it. Looking back, it goes back so far. Its history is lost in the fog as we peer into the fog of antiquity. Going back a couple of thousand years, it starts to get lost just before the birth, or just after the birth of Jesus Christ, not long after that. What happened? Well, England is the battleground, has been the world's battleground for our common law tradition. That island is where our common law tradition was fought out in assassination, bloodshed for centuries. And it came out the other side intact. That island, God has so foreordained history, so that island became the point of struggle. The whole world, the Roman system, the Babylonian system as it is expressed in the governments of men, and that includes the governments in the West of the Roman Church, wanted that island. Eventually, they hoped they could get it. The Roman Church then became the force to get its octopus-like tentacles around it and suck the life out of it. It got it so intense at one point that at least half, or at least a third, and probably closer to a half of all land on that island, the Pope of Rome owned personally. That's how much they were sucking out of it. But never, even when the Roman Empire was doing it, they could never with all their military might, and that includes the Church of Rome. They could never subdue the island to their religion, law, and government, and it never happened. Boy, did it come close. Boy, did they struggle to do it. As you know, Rome, the Roman Empire and the legions of Rome were finally just left. They couldn't get the Anglo-Saxons and the Scots in sufficient numbers to move into the cities where they could control them, but they had built, and to submit to their way of life. One of the things that they kept intact on the island of England that kept their common law vibrant were a few controlling features. One of them was the farming system of our common law. Law of the land, it's all about land. And the mining, the tin miners of Cornwall, that's what kept it alive. And the juries that they formed in these communities at the manor courts and the tin miners' courts and in the coal producing regions, which came later. And the forests, the law of the forest is part of our common law tradition. And what they call the law of the forester, which was another name for our common law tradition, applied in the timbered lands of England before they cut them all down. Now we have a fraternal organization in America called the Foresters. It's a Babylonian organization, like the Knights of Columbus and Masons and the Odd Fellows, and on and on it goes. But that name, at least, a name that came from the Foresters of England, that they had an independent local government. That's one of the hallmarks of our common law tradition. We had that in America with the mining districts in America, everything from the lead mines in northwest Illinois to the gold mines, the early gold mines in Georgia and North Carolina. We had mining districts. Then coming west, the iron mines of southern Missouri, the coal mines of Arkansas and Oklahoma, not to mention the ones in Appalachia and Kentucky and Illinois and Indiana. The oil fields that formed later, they were self-governing, and our common law tradition was very much a part of that in the oil states. As people moved from Pennsylvania into Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, Kansas, a big oil state there, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and then they jumped out to Southern California and Long Beach, where the Stewart brothers came from Pennsylvania, Titusville. You know, the largest gusher in the history of the world was north and south of Tejon Pass, not far from what people in Southern California called the Grapevine Hill. It produced, when it blew, 130,000 barrels of oil per day. 130,000. Did that for a month. No, was it 90 days? A long time. And then it dropped down to 90,000 barrels a day. 90,000, that's all. 90,000. And that went on for a few years. What do you do? It's blowing out of the ground. They tried to do everything they could to contain it, you know, so they could sell it. Lost a lot, but yeah. Well, no title of nobility can be granted here in America. This is the answer. The only titles among us are those which mark a person's grade in the Army or Navy or his office in the state. There are no titles of nobility allowed in America. Those which mark a person's grade in the Army or Navy or his office in the state, those are titles, but they're not titles of nobility. I say Mrs. Brent, that's a title. It's not a title of nobility. It's a title of respect. Mr., Mrs., Doctor, if he's a medical doctor, people call him Doc. doctor, that's a title of respect. Your Honor, judge sitting on a bench, you say, Your Honor, yes, sir, no, sir. In the military, those are titles of respect. They're not titles of nobility. Why? What about Esquire? Lawyers are sometimes called Esquire so or Squire so-and-so. We had a teacher in school. What does squire mean? Well, it's an old word that means farmer. Ag teacher when I was in FFA. Donald Boyer. Donald Boyer was our ag teacher. We called him Squire Don, not to his face, of course. Thank you, Mrs. Brent. Whoa. We called him Squire Don. Is that a title of nobility? No. What's a title of nobility? That means title of nobility is a title that not only is a title of respect, but it is inheritable. Your older son and the other people in your family enjoy the benefits of it. And because a title of nobility is about noble blood, see? They're saying our blood is cleaner than yours. It's more noble. You've heard of the noble elements on the periodic table? Noble elements. The noble metals, those are the metals. They call them noble because they're more stable. They're more noble. They don't rust as fast like gold. You know, it's kind of noble. It's a noble element. It rusts so slow you can hardly detect it. It oxidizes, but slowly. Silver, slowly. A little faster than gold, but not much. They last a long time. They're called more noble. Well, this is a lie, of course. It's unbiblical. That's why our Constitution of the United States says there will be no corruption of blood. No corruption of blood. Now, everybody's blood is corrupt, understand. Everybody's blood is corrupt. Somebody said in the chat yesterday, we were talking about this, and they said, well, we're talking about how corruption does pass generationally among mankind. It passes to every person, male and female. And we'd said the Bible teaches, but that is the seed of the male that passes it to the next person. The woman receives the corruption, but she herself, her egg, does not pass it on to the next generation. And that, of course, the explanation of that is to explain the purity of Jesus Christ and the virgin birth. His mother didn't have the ability, or God did not make her. She could not pass on her own corruption. And if he didn't have a member of Adam's race for a father, which he didn't, then yes, he is pure. You see how that works? No need for this silly doctrine called the Immaculate Conception of Mary. That's silly, stupid. They're just trying to, they don't go to the Bible and say, well, what does the Bible say? And then they come up with all this crazy stuff that doesn't do anything but create more problems. Well, if Mary was born without sin, or conceived without sin, the Immaculate Conception, they do that to try to explain how Jesus Christ could have been born that way. All that does is create another problem. Well, if Mary was born without sin, how'd that happen? How did her mother have this Immaculate Conception of Mary? See, that's not, well, then what are we going to do now? Because Mary's mother had a human father. Well, if you don't have the Bible as your final court of last resort, you just look like a darn fool. And you might look like a darn fool a lot of time anyway. I've had that experience because I don't know the Bible well enough, and I don't, if I do know it, I forget it, Okay. So this is all about titles of nobility. Esquire that's the French way of saying squire. Squire is a farmer. He also became a knight squire, somebody who carried a shield for a knight. It was said to be a title of nobility at one time. It doesn't make any difference. In England, if somebody is called sir, in England, somebody is called sir, that word was reserved at one time for only those who claimed to be part of the nobility of the country. Sir so-and-so. cirrhosis of liver. Oh, whatever. That's fantasy. We don't do that in America. But we do say sir, but it doesn't mean that you're a member of the nobility here in America. Why? Because we, by law, our Constitution forbids that any government recognize nobility that way. An esquire for lawyers, same way. It's what people call lawyers, comes from the old country. It's not the title of nobility. My children, my sons, nobody in my family can inherit my standing, my license to represent other people before a court in whatever state. No, they have to do that themselves if they want to, but they don't inherit it from me. And people do call me Esquire. Courts call me Esquire. They put it on the papers. Well, they do that because I call the judge, Your Honor. Why do we do that? Because we're so nasty otherwise. That's why. And it's good. The Bible says, show honor and respect to all men. Figure out a way to do it. Don't look down on anybody. Even though they may deserve it, don't do it. Be careful. Consider all men, the Bible says, of greater importance than yourself. God help us. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. And this, friends, neighbors, and kin, is In Church, INN. We're talking about the laws of nature of God. We're almost at the top of the hour. I'm going to read the rest of this 165. We've camped on it a long time. No, I've read it all. Let's go 166. May any citizen of the United States receive a title of nobility from a king or a prince or a government of any other country? Answer. The government here in the United States does not interfere with private persons, but no person holding any office or profit or trust under the Republic can accept of either a title, a sum of money, a salary, an office, or even a present, a gift from any such prince or government without the express permission of Congress. If some American accepts a title of nobility from another country, that's okay. He can do that. And that other country can bestow upon him, if they want to, a title of nobility. And if he accepts it, there's nothing that the government of the United States or any state can do about it. Our Constitution does not forbid that. What does it forbid? It forbids anybody holding office in the United States accepting such a position or having such a position. If you're a member of the nobility of England or France or whatever, Sweden, you can't run for president of the United States. That's what it's saying. Our government does not interfere with my private business. If I want to do that, and a fat chance of that happening, of course. I can imagine the King of England coming here and say, Brent, we've been reading about you in the newspapers, and we want to make you we want to dub you as a knight so your children can be a part of the nobility of England. That ain't going to happen. But if it did happen, if I wanted to, if I could accept it, so could you. But you couldn't run for public office in America. Why? Because your loyalty and your privileges would make you biased toward another country. Loyalty divided, or any appearance of divided loyalty, is no loyalty at all, according to our common law tradition, according to our Constitution, according to God. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. This is In Church. We've been talking about the laws of nature, a significant slice of the laws of nature called our Constitution of the United States, of our common law, the laws of nature unwritten. They say, Brent, if it's unwritten, why is it in the Constitution? Well, we observe it. God didn't put it in writing. God didn't put it in writing. He didn't see to its recordation. He saw the recordation. He saw to the recordation of this book. This is Brent Howlin' Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.